Hoping all is well with you and yours. Today, I am joined and honored by the presence of Dr. Robert Wynn, Director of the Massey Comprehensive Cancer Center over at VCU. Dr. Wynn, how are you doing today, brother?
Man, listen, I'm with you. It's all good, bro.
I'm here for it. Here for it. So I want to start at the beginning. I want to hear what first inspired you to pursue a career in medicine.
Yeah, so I think that my story may be a little bit similar to the people who came from the neighborhoods I came from, but maybe different than most people who are in medicine. They usually say that the vast majority, I think at one point, 60% of the people who wind up in medical school have parents or family members that wound up being in medicine, and so winds up being a little bit like the family business. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
For me, that was not the case. I was not medicine was not in my future. I wasn't even thinking about it, man. I was just, graduating from high school thinking if I can get something on lock, at GM, man, that was going to be good for me. And
Right.
then when I wound up at Notre Dame, there were two priests, Father Walter and Father Austin, who conspired to have me think about pursuing a career in medicine. So my story probably is more of a story of someone seeing something in me before I could even recognize it and be aware of it in myself. Going to school, I mean, clearly somebody thought at Notre Dame that I actually had a future there. I wasn't thinking about that. When I got there, man, all I was trying to do was to convince the freshman council. I remember this. I was like, yo, what job can I get back at GM? That's all I'm looking at. And so, I
Focus.
started doing engineering as a result of that, man. And I think at some point, again, folks cared enough, saw something in me before it even triggered me.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, even when they called that into existence and they said, well, we're going to sign you for pre med classes and all the rest of these other things, I still had my doubt, man. I was like, man, I ain't seen no black doctor. There's only one guy I knew about as a black doctor. That was not common. His name was Dr. Blackman, who, when I grew up, man, everybody knew Dr. Blackman, in the
Mm-hmm.
black community. But in general, you like, man, it ain't something I'm gonna do.
Right.
And so for those folks to call me and to see something and then to call it into existence and then to
Right.
be there for me to sort of say, no, we're gonna make sure you're gonna at least try this, was how my path began.
No, that's so powerful because I think so many young people don't have anyone who's believing in them. Like they'll say, "Oh, I want to do this," and they're like, "You?" But for folks to see something in you that you can't even see in yourself is amazing.
Man, listen, this is what I love about what you do and your show and about how things usually work in the world, man, because there's sometimes where, like everybody, man, every once in a while somebody say, yo, that son, you got talent. You be like, what? Well, I got talent doing what? Well, you need to do this, show up on here, right? And
Right.
so the story becomes not only does someone identify, but I've told young people the second part of that story that's the most important is that you give it a shot
Come on.
and that you have to sometimes overcome your own fear because man, I mean, just to be real, keeping it straight real, 100, keeping it 100,
No doubt.
bruh, I was like, man, these white folk are crazy. I'm like, they doing what? I'm supposed to be a what? Do they not know? What's wrong with them? And I was like, man, all right, well, yeah, let's roll with it then. But it wasn't as if as soon as they said it, I was like, oh, you're right. I absolutely should be there. I was
Right.
like, man, what? I was like, man, these folks, they done lost their mind. But cool, all right, I ain't gonna tell, all right, these priests wanna do whatever, let's go. Um,
Salute.
but think about that in a way in which it could have been so much fear. And
Right.
this is what I tell folks, young folks. I go, do not let the natural state, which happens to all smart people. Fear ain't nothing but an input, just like driving a car
Come
that
on.
says watch, not to say stop, not to say get off the highway. It
Right.
just says be aware that there's somebody else in this other lane and you got now, just be aware of that.
Come
And
on.
I tell people fear is the most normal thing fear ain't nothing but an input. It's what
Right.
you do with that input that right allows you to either stay on the straight, narrow, going down a path, or whether you overcorrect out of fear or
Right.
undercorrect because you're paralyzed by fear.
Come on.
Neither one of those wind up actually wind neither one of those keeps you on the path. And so
Right.
there's almost a recognition because society, as black folk, we sometimes talk about all the stuff. We ain't afraid of. I mean, that's the way we grew up culturally, right? We
Hmm.
overcorrect, and because we have this sense that we have become over time super adapters to pain. And so
Right.
we've been told this story since the 1600s that we are super adapters to pain. Now, it started for a while that we were super adapters to pain because of our biology. We now know that it ain't nothing to do with our biology. It's the resilience within the spirituality and the mind that
Yeah.
had to overcome situations where we had to adapt,
Yeah.
right? But we ain't no difference biological than anybody else in the context of what pain is. And so going back to that story was pointing out for me that the two things happened. Someone saw something in me, but the other thing was that I was open
Hmm.
to someone seeing something and willing to give it a try and willing to fail.
Right. That part, being willing to fail, because I think all the time about all the greatness we've lost because of perfectionism. All the people who could have done the thing, could have gone to med school, could have written a book, could have started, the art show, whatever the case may be, but they didn't because of fear. And I'd love to hear how your personal values and your faith shaped you to not respond to that sort of perfectionism and sort of shaped you to become the sort of physician that you are.
Man, I always say perfectionism sometimes is a maladaptive fear of wanting to be so perfect. Deep down inside, you just don't want to do it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So we used to talk about people being perfectionists and like as if that is of a significant value.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's just a convenient excuse, right, for not doing it. So,
Yeah.
playing football or playing whatever, man, playing a sport, occasionally, sometimes you need to be able to say, we going to run this play. This is what play got called. And my trust is that the teammate is going to show up when they supposed to show up
Absolutely.
for the play to be executed.
Right.
So for me, once the blade gets called from the heavens above, like for example, there ain't no man. When I thought about that, there ain't no reasonable, rational, ridiculous reason I could come up with why two priests at Notre Dame would pay attention to me.
Come on. Come
I
on.
mean, and so even as a young person, I'm like, man, this is crazy. So then, I grew up family of faith.
Uh-huh.
My grandmother, man, my family, man. I got, preachers and deacons and the whole nine. You know what I'm saying? I got folk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I got folk, man. Muslim faith, the whole thing. I got folk, man. And what I know about that is that I've recognized and seen with my grandfather another thing. Faith is not something that is actually you do faith because you say, well, I know what's gonna come on the other end. Nah. See, because if you know what was going, it's like a great story, man. I love great stories and faith because I say they're the same thing.
For real.
There
For real.
is no courageous act or great story without a risk.
Absolutely.
Ain't not a single story. You tell me the greatest story on the planet, it involves potentially risk. And in
Yeah.
fact, when you have the greatest act of courage, for example, you see baby, the typical one, a baby carriage and a car's about to hit it. Somebody got to get that out the way. You
Right.
don't know how that's gonna end.
No.
But as
No.
people of faith, sometimes we actually act like faith means that we know what's gonna happen on the other side.
Right. Right.
As
Right.
opposed to no, the faith is just the act, just do it.
Yes.
Just do it, right? And so for me, the med school thing or the going to pre-med at that time was an act of faith because man, I straight up was like, this don't make no doggone sense. But since clearly, how crazy is it that I got two right
Come
folk
on.
coming at me saying, I think you should be, son, you are not the best line I've ever, son. And you're not an engineer. And I was like, well, wait a minute, man. I'm passing all my classes. I'm
Right.
doing all right. And they were like, you are not an engineer. You should be a doctor. And I remember telling them, y'all, in fact, I ain't telling what I was on my mind, but I was like, y'all, all right, y'all got some problems though, but okay. And so it was this thing of saying, I don't know if
Hmm.
this is going to work out, but this is the play that's before me.
Yeah.
This is the opportunity and the door I'm supposed to at least attempt to go through. So,
Right.
you know what? Just do it.
Yeah.
And when we get caught up sometimes, like, well, I don't know what happens, man, quit all of what you don't know. That's the whole
Yeah.
point.
That's the
You
point.
don't No. This is the test of faith. Faith don't say, well, I'm gonna have it because I know.
Right.
Faith says I'm gonna have it and I'm gonna move through.
There it is.
Because my trust says, but we don't know the outcome because the trust that we have
Mm-hmm.
could say, yeah, you don't understand why you ain't gonna get the outcome that you think you want to get, but here's why I'm doing it, right? We try to predetermine for the man above
Come on.
all the elements as opposed to saying with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, man, they're like, well, get through the fight, man. I've been like, yo, come on, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Now they didn't know whether what the outcome was gonna be, but they said, he said it, I'm gonna do it. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. That's all it took.
That's all it took. And
All it took.
sometimes, man, as a people, we got so much because we're used to now analyzing, overanalyzing, the overanalyzed, and then we overanalyze that, and then we come up with all this stuff about, well, I would have done it if we had the perfect conditions. Well, he ain't saying nothing about no perfect conditions. He said, move now.
Now, right. You're talking about that paralysis of analysis. Where
Man,
people
listen.
get so stuck.
Man, we get stuck. And and the paralysis of analysis also fits into that perfectionist thing because sometimes I'd be like, you afraid to get up off of it
Yeah.
because you don't want to be criticized. But last time I heard, I was just at a high school graduation, man. And I
Uh-huh.
told him a quick story about Albert Einstein when
Yes.
before he was the Albert Einstein that we know, he was a teacher.
Right.
And
Right.
apparently the story goes that he was on that time using a blackboard
Uh-huh.
and he was, doing the nine time table, nine times one, nine times 18. Now,
Yeah.
listen, he knew what he was doing. So he got down to nine times 10 and he put down 91.
All right.
And when he put down 91, you can hear people mocking him and like,
Yeah.
what? And then the class laughed.
Right.
And Albert Einstein turns to this class and he says, it's interesting that you celebrated none of the times I got it right.
Come on.
You didn't actually support, you didn't celebrate, you didn't
Come
acknowledge.
on.
But the one time I made a small mistake,
Right.
all of you pay attention to that.
And that's
He
something.
says, now the reason why I did that is so the class that you know that in this world, people will not always celebrate what you've done that's right, but they will actually be able to quickly identify even your small mistakes.
Oh,
So
what?
understand that you have to be tied to something more than the mistakes because the only people that don't make mistakes, he would go on to say, is someone who's never done anything.
Yeah. For real. For
And
real.
so there is this level of fear that we will come up short,
Mm-hmm.
not recognizing that the goal is to, if you're going to fail, fail fast.
Right.
Because then you be like, yeah, that one wasn't for me.
Right.
Right? Fail fast. In fact, the funny part about most of the successful people, most of them ain't afraid to fail. If they're gonna fail, they want to get it out the way fast.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I am very much with you in the concept of the mental and the spirituality of understanding how to move through things, particularly when it's uncertain, because
Yeah.
that takes courage.
Has to. Has to. Now I want to hear you talk about, after you go through Notre Dame, they tap you for medical school. You're like, okay, and you clearly go to medical school. What were those opportunities to fail fast and the challenges that you faced as you moved through medical school? You're going into a practice, like, and how did you overcome them? Like, what were those things that just jammed you up, but you still made it through?
Brother, that was a test because now you surrounded with a whole bunch of smart people, bro. I went from Notre Dame to like Michigan, bro. In medical school at that time, I think that school wound up being, anyways, it's top five or something, man, bro.
Yes.
That was a test for a brother, man.
Right.
Because
Right.
every once in a while you be like, I thought I was smart. Oh,
You in the
this
ocean
cat
now. You in the
this
ocean.
right, this cat over here and this cat over here be like, and this dude over here, oh my. And
Yeah.
so that was the first shot to sort of saying, listen, it's about making it and refocusing things on not competing with, but making sure that I was able to do my best because those are my gifts. And I think medical school, man, was a great test of when somebody says, the best way to be unhappy is to look at everybody else's gift.
Ain't that the truth?
except for the one you got.
That's so real. That comparison.
Man, listen, we be doing that 24 ways of Lamar, and then we doing so well that we forgot we even got a gift.
That
You know,
part.
my gift was that I went from not even thinking about being in medical school to being one of the top 5 programs in the country.
Right.
And I was there, and I could easily have been like, with the struggles there, like, oh man, I hate medical. And then you have to say, hold up. What was your gift, man?
Yeah.
You made your gift may not have been to be there to be the number one student. Your gift may have been there to absorb the knowledge to graduate so that you could
Come
take
on.
whatever you learned and
Right.
absorb that and create the gift that was given to you so that you can bless others, right?
Isn't that something?
That took growth, man. So I will say
Yeah.
that Michigan wound up being my growth phase because, man, when you come in on some of the things, you be like, how the, what the, how, what?
Come on.
Like, and then you see, and then when you get to some of them dudes, they be like, well, of course. You just did, you be like, man, there ain't no of course. Ain't no
Right.
of course. Clearly, I must be missing something. There ain't no of course. But then you figured out that you work with it
Yeah.
and that you wind up being, I would say that this sense of as good as anybody.
Yeah.
You see, the score shouldn't have been the context of how you valued and bring the value to yourself. The fact of the matter is, when I graduated from Michigan and felt just like everybody else. Man, I was a Michigan medical student, and like I didn't really care where I graduated. I graduated.
Right. Right.
And then as an older guy, you can look back and be like, the ranking in which you graduate did not determine your impact in the world.
Yeah.
And in
That's
fact, telling
important.
young folk that, man, sometimes
Yes.
because we are now so into, well, if you're number one, the number one graduate didn't mean nothing, but you were number one at that moment. It don't
Right.
mean that you're gonna have the
Exactly.
biggest impact of anybody from that class.
Come on. Come on.
You know,
Oh, that's lovely. I love that you say that because I think about how so many people get so stuck in this sense of like, I have to be the best, like forever and ever, amen. And not understanding that, like, not only this failing, as you talked about, is a part of the process, but really like trying to figure out and understanding that it is indeed a process. I think, as you were speaking earlier, it made me think about how many young people aren't willing to understand that it's a process, aren't willing to understand that I'm not just going to immediately get there. It's going to take time. So thinking about young people in general, but particularly those who are underrepresented, they're in that space, the Michigans of the world, the Notre Dames of the world, and they're seeing not a lot of people that look like them. What word do you say to them as they consider medicine as a calling? Like, how do they get through? How do they become that which they haven't seen in the real life yet?
and you know what, I appreciate that. I also thank you for calling that out. I think of medicine and science as part of that ministry,
Yeah.
that it is a calling and a blessing to be able to lay hands and lay, the scientific knowledge and,
Right.
of how the science then gets materialized so that it winds up being uh, an amazing thought that then becomes an amazing sort of process within a
Come on.
laboratory that ends up being an amazing medicine molecule that becomes an amazing medicine, then an amazing therapy that
Yeah.
saves lives. And so what you said is the process, and sometimes people don't want to trust the process because again, to trust the process, you have to be strong in your faith,
Yes.
right? When that old song said, God ain't done with me yet. My
Right.
my grandmother used to say, she goes, you understand what that means is that when God ain't through with you yet, means that He Himself
Come on.
actually has to allow you to get through steps and
Come on.
phases and bumps and bruises
Right.
and getting the experience so that when you arrive, you then become your best as opposed to being the best because we always talk
Right.
about being the best. I'm like, well, what does that actually mean?
Come on.
Right? Because you could be the number one student in the class and be the number one student in class, but are you your best
Right.
to be the best for?
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
if we really are vessels, the question is, what are you being the best for?
That part.
Right? And if you number 10 on that list, the number 10 student, but you bringing the willingness to be the vessel to learn the much you can, You again, that ranking didn't rank the number one guy from Michigan who graduated that class going to have the biggest impact. It's we all are moving along our processes
Right.
to be aware of what it means to be moving towards your best self.
Mm-hmm.
You know that whole thing about loving on some me. You know, they say what's the best, what's the best, loving on some me, you know, but the
Yeah.
reality is loving on some me in a way that is selfless so
Yes.
that you become a vessel to be loving on other folks, man, to deliver the
Yeah.
gifts. And I think that it's that social connectivity
Mm-hmm.
where we've now made it all that it's about you as
Yeah.
opposed to about we. In fact, I was telling somebody, if you read the greatest books, it is wrong to actually, the greatest story isn't usually about the doctor. It's
Right.
about the doctor's support of the patient, which makes the story great.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And
Absolutely.
sometimes we get caught up with because we see these ER, you know, movies,
Right.
ER, and all these shows, and then it's
Yeah.
about the doctor. But in real life, outside of Hollywood, it
Yeah.
ain't about the doctor. It's about the doctor's support of that loved one
Come
and
on.
that story of how they loved enough to be able to be humble enough and
Yeah.
be able to be curious enough
Right.
and be able to sometimes even be lucky enough
Mm-hmm.
and blessed enough to have the right things to save that person or to allow that person to stay. And sometimes, to be honest with you, even if you do everything right,
Yeah.
ultimately, well, you know, I tell people that there's artificial intelligence, but there's absolute intelligence, and we ain't in control of that.
Come on. That's above our pay grade.
Man, come on. Come on, man.
No, but
But to young folk, I try
yeah.
to tell them, and if I've learned anything, it is occasionally if you can stop comparing yourself to others, but compare yourself to your best self
Yeah.
and the purpose of why you're trying to achieve your best self,
Mm-hmm.
that will keep you anchored.
Yeah. And you know what's so important about that is that this the way you're talking about it in terms of like trying to be your best self. That's an act of kindness toward yourself. Because if going back to the analogy about being number 10, if I'm number 10 and all I'm doing is comparing myself to number one and I'm beating myself up and just feeling so discouraged, I don't want to do medicine at all anymore because I can't be number one. But I haven't yet been kind to myself and say I can still make an impact here in this space from this juncture rather than just completely destroying myself and taking myself entirely away from the calling that God put on my life. That to me is
Man,
a real
listen.
tragedy.
Man, that's a tragedy. And what it is gratitude. And sometimes for
Yeah.
me, the fact that you are in medical school should elicit gratitude.
Yes.
You may not be number one, but that didn't mean you have to be number 10.
No.
It didn't even mean you had to be in med school. And so
Right.
there is a level of gratitude that
Yeah.
everybody says, well, what's, if you had to say, what are the three things, that you need to tell young people? I said, one, understand that, that the world is ready to be at
Mm-hmm.
the ready to point out your mistakes. They're always ready to do that. But you need to understand that mistakes will be made.
Yeah.
Not to say that you want to continue to make the same mistakes over and over, but
Of
mistakes will be
course.
made. The second most powerful thing I learned, man,
Mm-hmm.
is holding on to what you could be grateful for.
Yes.
Because sometimes, man, we throw out our blessings because we so focused on somebody else's that we forget that you may be number 10, but you may be picking up on other things outside the classes
Come on. Right.
that may not be graded, that you don't even, again, people seeing things in you, God sees things in us. And so he may be giving you not only the lessons on the academic side, but
Mm-hmm.
other lessons that are not being scored. And so while you
Oh.
may be ranked number 10, you don't
Right.
understand what you absorb and that might actually be used later on for major impact.
That part.
And so we think, that, it is funny, man, but being grateful is actually really important. I was saying to people, we really good about Job and understanding, like, how to get through tests when we're being tested.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
God actually has another test of when you're favored.
There.
And that
For real.
is as difficult,
Come on.
if not more difficult
Yeah. Right.
than getting when you don't have that. Because when you have something, all of a sudden you can lose your spirit and lose your mind.
Yeah. Real.
Right? So think about the guy graduating or the woman graduating number 10 in the medical school,
Mhm.
feeling what a disaster and what a failure they have been. God has given them, right,
Right.
the blessing
Yeah.
of being there, of
Right.
serving, of
Right.
all of these other things, man. And actually sort of says, listen, I'm gonna give you these things.
Mhm.
And instead of understanding and being, yep, I ain't got number one, but I got number 10. But you know what? Here's what I'm gonna do, what I'm gonna do. And
Right.
I'm grateful for, what he has stored on me.
For sure.
Instead, you gonna be, and what happens is you think it all, you undermining yourself,
Come on.
but more importantly, it's disrespectful to the gift you've been given from the man above.
That that is so critical because when we get out of alignment in that way, it's like we're now just walking. There's no safety net. We're just walking on that tightrope all by ourselves, and it's like you've gone so far off the path. It just continues to compound the issue. You felt lost before, but you didn't realize you walking into further confusion when you disrespect the gift the way you described it.
Man, come on. It's crazy when you have been favored. The test is to one, recognize you've been favored.
Yeah,
And then what you gonna do when you've been favored?
that's it.
And then how do you understand that favoredness that God has blessed on you and allowed you to have
Hmm.
allows you then a special sense of connectedness because you say, okay, now that I have gotten these gifts and I am, as we sort of say, hashtag, people be hashtagging highly favored. When
Yeah,
people
yeah,
say that, I go, don't be hashtagging that.
yeah. Hmm.
Don't be walking around, I'm highly favored. What does that mean? Because sometimes when you quote walking around highly favored, but talking about somebody else's car, you highly favored, but talk about, I wish I had so and so's
Come
money. How
on.
you going to be highly favored? Those two do not compute. You either
No.
highly favored or you not. But
Yeah.
highly favored should be a level of contentment,
Come
right?
on.
Of
Innocent.
your favor.
Yeah.
And now the question is, hopefully, what gets stirred of that is, I now am grateful for this favor, and I now want to serve because I know I don't earn. I know I don't. It ain't something that is owed to me. It is something that I've been blessed with, and here's what I need to give back.
For sure.
Right? I mean, so people keep saying, Dr. Wynn, how you get off? Man, look, man, I look. I didn't need to be a
Come on.
doc, didn't need to go to Notre Dame. When I was born back in the '60s, man, around the mid '60s in that era, man, dudes, premature kids used to be gone, man. I mean, they even lost
Yeah.
John. I think one of the Kennedys was gone, like the year before I went, and so most people were like, "This boy ain't gonna make it." So the
Right.
fact that I wound up having a grandmother who would say she would walk to the hospital every day, and she would say, "I would pray with every step," and she gives me the story. She goes, "And I told them doctors and I told them nurses, this one he gonna be here. So y'all might give up on him, but I ain't giving up on him. I'm coming in every day to make sure y'all do the right." Man,
Come
listen.
on.
Right? This little underweight, premature sort of guy is here to tell
Right.
you that when he, right, is going to curry a gift and curry, blessings, man, come on, man. You're supposed to do something with that.
Have to.
Man, and most people don't even understand sometimes how blessed they are because they're always not looking at their blessing.
Co- Whew.
They're looking at somebody else's blessing.
Somebody else.
Come
Whew.
on, man. So that act for young people of not comparing yourself, but competing in the concept of trying to be your best self, I
Right.
think is the way, man, you can also make not only gratitude. Gratitude for me equals happiness too, man. Because if you're
Yeah.
grateful for something, man, you can be happy. When you could be the number two person. Think about this number two graduate, and you mad and feel like God done left you because this person. Man, what kind of craziness is that?
Madness. Madness.
Madness, but it is around us every day.
Mm-hmm. That is so real. That is so real. So fast forward a little bit to you get through med school, you get through residency, all that. What drew you to the Massey Center? Like, what was unique about the
Yeah.
approach that said, you know what, this looks like a place for me?
Man, listen, this is the one place where, I listen, I just felt connected.
Love that.
And you may say, why? So I looked at other places, but this place for me was special in that it was the only place where I went to where the senior leaders were able to articulate that they wanted a leader who was certainly going to bring better science. And we done, man, I love science. If loving science is wrong, I don't want to be right. I swear to God. Man, look, I'm good. I love science, man. And so, and looking at how better science can bring together more knowledge to actually help more people is where my zone is. And so they, but that wasn't it. It was, we want you to make sure that we bring more science and a high level science, and we want to make sure you have impact clinically. But at that time, the president of the university also said, but I want to make sure that as a leader, that you also have
Mhm.
the fire and the commitment to make sure that the communities we serve benefit.
Yeah.
And he said, it's great to have one of those high impact papers.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, but it's even better to have a high impact paper, but have high impact in your communities.
For real.
And I had never heard a president of a university speak like that ever. And in fact, man, that moved me in a way that when I left that day, I was like, that's the place. I mean, literally, he was
Yeah.
like, man, I ain't even like, I was like, that's the place. Other people were like, well, Dr. Wynn, what about this and what about that? I was like, oh, yeah, I heard you. Well, this other place is ranked higher. Yeah, I heard all that.
Uh-huh.
I heard all that. But this is the place
Yeah.
because, man, to be able to bring together the the purpose of using science and the academic person and using it as a tool that was articulated to do good
Mm-hmm.
for people,
Mm-hmm.
that was the outcome and end result, the desired outcome and end result, not just more papers, not just more, but the
Right.
outcome and the end result was articulated by the president of the university,
Yeah.
that they wanted outcomes for the people. He said, man, I was like, man, done.
Yeah. That's all you needed to hear.
Yeah, I was like, done.
Beautiful.
So that was the motivation. And when I got here, it was just been it's been good, man. I mean, you guys and folks within the faith-based groups within the Commonwealth, within Richmond, man, it's been just tight. Facts Faith Friday,
Yes.
being able to organize that with F. Todd Gray, and Sister Rudine, Rudine Haynes.
Mm-hmm.
It has been just really awesome.
That's it. That's it. Because it's something to what you're saying is that it's people centered, and I think that so much, just in the education world in general, like being on like the theological education side of things, I see sometimes we'll talk about public theology and practical theology, and I was like, but if it doesn't have practical implications and if it's not public, what's the point? So in the same vein, if we're doing all this research but it don't affect actual people, what are we doing?
What are we doing, man? And so it was one of the only places that got it when I said, I want to be um, unapologetically a community focused
Yes,
academic cancer center
no doubt.
doing good for the people. In fact, I said, there's a phrase of a scientist that we talk about from bench to bedside, meaning that basic
Mm.
fundamental science, which is true,
Yeah.
drives knowledge that then we can then apply to clinic. But I said, that's good and everything, but I don't want to, I want to complement that, not tear that
Uh-huh.
down. I want to complement that with to extending that to a people to pipette model, meaning that we understand the missing data within our community so that we could be a
There it is.
community we could be a community responsive research, man. And so when
Yeah.
I've coined that phrase, we're doing community responsive research, it
Yes.
gave me a framework that says we should be learning within the community
Come
and
on.
being able to bring that back and challenge our brightest scientists and our science doctors to say, come up with refining their science so that it can be
Right.
a bigger benefit. Man, I'll give you a quick example. I was with um, Delegate Jones
Mm-hmm.
back when he was, back when he's in Richmond, uh, and I was in his ward and I was walking around and like I had done with a number of folk, um, you know, uh, and at the end of that, I had a couple women come up to me, sisters, says, what are you doing about them cancers, those women cancer? I'm like, what women cancer?
Right.
What women cancer? And then we ultimately, long story short, got to the fact that what they were talking about was endometrial cancer, and that they had three people in their neighborhood, two or three people died, women died from endometrial cancer. And it was curious. I was like, yeah, I don't think much about endometrial cancer. So again, community. I
Yeah.
came back to my pathologists and clinicians. And in fact, a woman that had just been recruited from California here was doing, women's oncology, right?
Uh-huh.
And I said to her, man, what's going on? I go, have you been seeing anything with endometrial? She stopped. She said, how'd you know? I just came from California, where predominantly, white and maybe Latino, but predominantly a white patient population. And I'm here, and I'm seeing cancers like I've never seen before with with black women with endometrial cancer. I was like, what the? So then I went to my basic scientists. I said, what are you guys studying with endometrial cancers? Well, we're not really. Boom, idea. That
Right.
it didn't come from the university.
No.
It came from being out in the
Right.
community with Delegate Jones at that time,
Right.
Reverend Jones, and then that conversation again happened. And I
Right.
always sort of say conversations always happen if you have your antennas open. If you have your antennas up, you're gonna hear it.
Come
What
on.
most people don't say, well, no, ain't nothing ever come to me. That's because your antennas either broken or they down.
That's
But
it.
if you get your antennas up, that was the day I said, wait a minute, I need to take this back. Once we did that, we wound up actually creating, I think, one of the first clinical trials, not only in the Commonwealth, but in the country,
Whoa.
looking at specifically coming up with potential therapies for African American women, specifically
Whoa.
with
Whoa. Whoa.
endometrial cancer. Now, we could have told that story about how great we were and how smart we were, but come on, we got smarter because we were connected with and to the community.
That's really it. It was a bottom up approach, not a top down from the mountaintop coming down to the people, but the people bubbled it up.
Come on, man. Come on, man. In fact, that's what I have always enjoyed. And sometimes we forget the history of our folk, particularly within faith-based leaders, that many of the policies, many of the most amazing things that have happened
Hmm.
came from the people that wound up getting to the people that wound up being the spokespersons for our folk. But
Hmm.
that started at the people. We always talk about, I have a dream. Man, that I have a dream speech,
Come
right,
on.
came from folk.
Yes.
That was that Martin was the deliverer of that, right? He was a spokesperson of that.
Right.
But we know that the I Have a Dream speech was influenced by younger people that he was with,
Yes.
right? I mean, that's the full story, right? Now, I know what story we got to tell, but there is a connectedness where that comes from the people, man, because that's the source. And as that, he was then able to refine that. And as Mahalia Jackson said, tell him about the tell him about the dream, Martin. But by that, the connectedness was not only did Martin have the dream, but in part that dream was also inspired by young women and other people who was with
Right.
him, right? Who actually was able to, sort of say, hey, that's real good. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And so, in some ways, I think we forget the connectedness within us. And so, when we try to go top down, you're going to get some benefit, but you get more benefit when you do from both.
Right. No question. No question. And as you talk about that, I have a dream speech. I gotta shout out Prathia Hall.
Man, come
Gotta
on.
shout out Prathia Hall. Anytime
Come
we talk
on.
about that speech, because Martin knew he had to give his props. He had to check in with Prathia and be like, "Is it cool? This is a good bar you got here. Is it cool?" And she gave
Right.
us all love. So no, definitely,
And,
definitely
and,
shout out.
and what I love about her is that she understood that, yeah, I need to get it, like, yeah, you got a bigger platform and it's for
Right.
my people. So I
Right.
ain't even try to hang on because my blessing is just the fact that, yeah, I got it, but my blessing,
Come
right,
on.
it's just got multiplied because my goal is to be my best self by helping my people. And by the way, the connectedness is it says, I want you. It's like, man, somebody says, how you get your song famous? Let Beyonce sing it. You know what's
That's right.
up.
Don't keep that on your SoundCloud.
You
Use
keep doing
Beyonce.
your stuff. Be like, yo, if Beyonce got that joint, and the blessing will come back. It's the same
Yeah.
thing that I keep trying to tell people that we are in this interesting era where we believe
Hmm.
that everything has to be us as opposed to it has to be focused on the me. I'm the best.
Right.
Look at me. I'm here. My social media is blown up. But
Come on.
what is happening with the we?
That's
Because
it.
that's where the power is. You know what I'm
That's
saying?
it. That's it. I was telling the church a couple Sundays ago. I heard somebody say one could chase 1,000, two could chase 10,000. So we got to stop just making it just about ourselves to understand we get further together. That's the only way we get further.
Man, listen, I say the only thing that's weaker than the word weak is lonely.
Come
And
on.
when you're the only one,
Oof. God bless. God
look,
bless.
when you're the only one. Now, sometimes you have to be the only one,
That's right
but
too.
willingly being the only one
Right. Cut yourself off from everybody.
don't make no sense, man.
Nah, nah. It's not
Don't
healthy.
make no sense.
Mm-mm.
So man, it's about we about I think that as I've told people that people were always wondering, well, how we get to where we got to? Well, it just didn't happen.
Mm-mm.
And I love being a doc, man. Listen, in my lifetime, this is the other thing that actually I've been learning. The third thing is
Uh-huh.
that we have to be better communicators. Because check this out.
Yes,
We got a whole bunch of frustrated docs running around here right now. And I get it. I get it. I get it. Because people like, man, all y'all do is y'all get all our money, your taxpayer dollars, and all y'all
right.
doing is all the studying. Ain't nothing happened to me. And you know why nothing happened? Because we don't always tell people because we're so busy about getting to the next problem
Real.
and dealing with the next thing. It's almost like when they were talking about the where you could be so busy
Mm-hmm.
and so into your own space,
Mm-hmm.
right, that when you turn back around, people say, well, you didn't understand a good idea. You go, well, you ain't even taking me to town. So here's some number. 34% fewer people in the United States are dying from cancer today
Mm.
relative to 1991. And I'm
91.
going to tell you that most people wouldn't even know that.
Right.
And in fact, the crazy part of this is that black folk,
Mm-hmm.
right, the difference between black men and white men in lung cancer, that
Yeah.
gap was narrowing to almost, to be quite honest with you, where you couldn't really tell the difference between black men and white men. Where
Wow.
now, if you went back to 1991, 30% few more black folk died
Mm-hmm.
compared to white, their counterparts, white folk.
Yeah.
By 2022, 2023, it was only 10% more. Now, I'm gonna be straight up with you. That didn't happen because people eating more kale and drinking more carrot
Right.
juice, man, and
Right.
hitting the gym, bro. It ain't.
Yeah, that's not
It's
why.
right. So the science, which we try to sometimes always get really, what do you say? With some of the science, we are so prone now to conspiracies that it has
Yeah.
become almost a a game
Yeah.
that has become dangerous for us
Very dangerous.
as a result of not understanding that 34% more Americans are showing up to church, 34% more people are showing up to Thanksgiving, 34% more. And by the way, it turns out that while the numbers aren't as great for African Americans, it ain't like the science ain't hit us.
Right.
But most people wouldn't know that. And and
Nah.
and then we get mad when they don't know. And I say, how people gonna know what you didn't tell?
That part. How?
And so we've been so busy about, some of the, it's like, the good Samaritan, man. Everybody, somebody on the street, oh man, I'm sorry, man, I gotta go.
Right.
I said,
Right.
oh man, listen, man, I'll get back at you, but I gotta go, man. Or,
Yeah.
I said, what if the dream team of Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson, if they sunk the last basket to win the gold, right, for the
Mm-hmm.
dream team, and they just walked off the court like, yeah, now, yeah, all right, and tomorrow, I got tomorrow, y'all. We would be
Right.
sitting there like, what happened?
Yeah.
But in science, we have been so focused on writing papers for each other
Oh.
that we forgot to like let folk know, wait a minute, y'all, hold up. Even in rural areas,
Yeah.
10% fewer people are dying from cancer, which means 10% more people are showing up to family reunions. So we need to stop
Understood.
with the craziness of blaming folk because they're gonna go to Dr. TikTok and Dr. Google.
Appointments infinite.
Appointed infinite. But what we haven't done is be able to understand and be able to work with folks that says, now listen, there are some absolute facts.
Right.
You can pretend that the sun doesn't rise in the east and settles in the west. You could say that.
Mm-hmm.
You can go around and say, well, I don't have lungs and I don't have hearts. We got some other organs.
Right.
Okay, you could say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I love about science is that science is about, and Father Hesburgh once said to me, which was, I mean, which is famous for once saying, he goes, "There's no such thing. Science and religion are not at war with one another
Hmm.
unless it's either bad science or bad religion."
There it is. There it is.
But the two are not at war. In fact,
No,
they complement one. So
very
we
much
know
so.
we have a heart because of the science, the anatomy. We know how the heart works because we understand that it has four chambers and how it circulates the blood
Right.
because someone studied that to put that knowledge in our hands.
Come on.
And so there's an interesting thing that when you start thinking so much that we are almost like we know more than the man above, right? And that what he has put here,
Right.
that we gonna just start looking at it like, yeah, whatever, yeah, whatever, whatever.
Come on.
Then we get lost.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, then we get lost.
No, no question. Which I mean, everything you're saying, Doctor Wynn, it just really punctuates the importance of what Facts and Faith Friday is, and that sort of understanding that religion and science don't have to be adversaries, and as a matter of fact, they work well together. So, talk to us a bit about how that initiative came to be. Like, how did Facts and Faith Friday happen?
Man, it's gonna sound like a joke, but I always tell people, but it's a true story, man. A doctor, a lawyer, and a preacher got together.
There
I
it is.
mean, that's what happened, man.
There it is.
And what I will say is, Sister Rudine,
Mm-hmm.
who is someone that I just have great admiration for. I mean, she's an
Okay.
amazing doctor. I mean, an amazing lawyer and an amazing advocate and just an amazing person. She brought F. Todd Gray, Pastor Gray, and myself together initially to just so that we should talk. But it wound up being in the background of COVID, and we started answering the question: well, is it safe?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do this? And then we came up with the whole idea that maybe people from the faith-based groups would say, well, how do I keep my people safe? And should I have, and
Yeah.
if I am going to have services, how does that look? And what should I do? X, Y, Z. And so it turns out, now I will take credit for this one. They came up facts and faith, and then I came up with the Friday. Because, so that's my contribution to that, man.
I
I
love
ain't even
it.
gonna lie. That's my contribution. I always tell Pastor Gray and Sister Rudine, I didn't come up with the Friday part, so so there.
There it is. I brought Friday there, y'all. Y'all get
I
Friday.
brought Friday to the mix. I brought Friday to the mix. And so we made an agreement, particularly during COVID, that we would meet once a week.
Got you.
And that once a week was bringing information, not only about COVID, but about housing, about education, man, about law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that would be used to then bring back. By the way, they could say what they want to say, but we had Dr. Fauci on, Dr. Collins on, man. We
Come
had people
on.
from on the regular who was coming from the CDC, man, on the
Right.
regular who were coming from the FDA. Because I was like, y'all don't need to go through some second source. If you're going to ask question, ask it to the people who are at the source.
Right. Right.
Do you know, man? I think we went from third worst to like third best in the country, man, and getting people vaccinated because of facts faith, Dr. Hodges, Pastor Hodge and Pastor Bibbs. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just people just rolled, man, and started getting
Yes.
connected and understood that we were. But the thing I love about Facts Faith Friday, man, is it's true. On one Friday, Norm Oliver, who was then the Virginia Department of Health commissioner,
Mm.
actually one person asked, again, community, asked him, all right, he's like, all right, Dr. Oliver, I get it that you got funeral homes people getting the vaccine, but we're given the last right. So why are we in there? And
Come
he was like,
on.
I don't know. That's a great idea.
Right. Right.
Do you know that as a result of that, the Commonwealth of Virginia became the first in the country to allow its faith-based leaders to be put in that category B with getting those vaccines.
There it
That
is.
was us. And that was the power of interacting with folks directly from the Facts Faith Friday. We've now extended beyond that. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm pretty happy that we now know that, you guys, faith-based leaders, man, y'all like docs. Y'all be on the front line 24 ways till tomorrow. But somebody also has to be thinking about you. And so we've also understood that there are a lot of stresses and pressures and mental health and those types of, or I say mental, when I mean mental health, I mean really mental wellness, that
Yeah.
ultimately we got to pay attention to the people who are actually, like you have that, what you call that thing, like on your TV, your remote control, you keep pressing and pressing and pressing, but if there ain't no energy levels, man, you ain't gonna know till your battery runs dry. So we actually now have a set aside group, also once a month, man, where we're checking in with our faith-based leaders. So
Uh-huh.
I love the fact that that would never have come about without a champion within the community, Rudine,
Yeah.
Sister Rudine Haynes. And it wouldn't have happened without faith-based leaders just like F. Todd Gray and others, man, coming to
Yes.
the table, and you all coming to the table on these Fridays. And I am been forever grateful because that community, man, has been really meaningful. So I want, and man, listen, brother, but you listen, man, I want to thank you.
Thank
Come on, man, for being part of that. Come on, man. I want listen. I know it's a podcast, but I'm giving you a shout out for being there and being able to make and ensure that we're able to get the message to young people too, man. So listen, man, mad respect.
No, the feeling is mutual, bro.
Appreciate
Appreciate
you.
I appreciate you too, for real. Now I wanna ask you a couple more, just like when you think about like the hard days, the challenging days of this. You mentioned COVID, which is like 5 years ago when this whole thing started here in the U.S. What keeps you grounded and inspired in this work, especially in those difficult days?
Yeah, man. It's that's thank you for answering that question, man. For me, at the end of the day, people can talk about, oh, he did this in science and he did this with patients and he did this. Man, all I want somebody to say to me is that way, man, he's a good and faithful servant, man.
No doubt, no
Bruh,
doubt.
they could be like, in the early days, I did some cool things. I mean, I worked, put out a CD back in the day. We used to call it CDs and all of a
Uh huh.
sudden records, with people like Black Thoughts and people like, Most Def. And back in the day, I, called myself doing a little bit of producing and all of a sudden, and that was good, right? I was an athlete and that was good. But man, if someone could just say that dude was just a good father, but that dude really was just a good servant, man.
Yeah.
If as long man, look, if I had that, then I have had a useful and worthwhile life, man. That's
Come
it.
on. There it is.
That's
That
it,
sums it
man.
all up. That sums it all up.
That's it.
Absolute. Now that's what it is, man. That's what it is. So how can folks who are watching this, folks who are listening, folks who are inspired by this, how can they support the work of the Massey Center? How can they get involved with Facts and Faith Friday?
Absolutely. Well, the nice thing about Facts Faith Friday is that, that's open. We have that open to the public. So we made it deliberate so that people could join from all over the United States. And in
Awesome.
the early days, man, we were inspiring people from Philadelphia,
Come on.
Detroit, New York, man, Boston, who would all come up on that joint and actually participate. And we sort of said that we welcome that.
Yes.
The other thing I think in the context of Massey is that we certainly have websites and we have a community outreach and engagement program that we're going to be bringing Dr. Kim Rhodes from UCSF. Who's going to be joining us soon. That outreach and engagement is really an important component for our young people because we have summer programs for them to be exposed to science, not just being a doctor, but just exposed to science
Right.
and the health field. We have other things that we really would like to do with the community in the context of screening and other awareness events.
Mm-hmm.
So what I always used to tell people is that, when I first got here, people were like, well, no, don't nobody go to Massey. They don't belong to us. I'm going, man, it all belongs to us.
Come on.
And since Massey is by definition a safety net hospital,
Right.
uh, you hold up now. I'm just saying that that's not a private place. That place
Yeah.
belongs to you. And we're trying to really get that message home
No
that
doubt.
that's a place where you go to, not when there is nowhere else to turn to. That's a place where I want you to think about when you just are thinking that somebody either got cancer or you got cancer.
Right. Right. There it is. Because it's about that preventative, and just there's so much benefit in trying to prevent this thing than trying to react to it.
Man, come on, man, and we got better screening now. We
Yeah.
know we ain't no question whether tobacco is plus or minus. We know that it
Right.
contributes to disease, right? So having a good diet. By the way,
Yeah.
we understand that spirituality and by the fact of the matter is having less stress is
Come
actually a
on.
benefit, right? That we know that your genes that you're born with are reacting to the environment in which you're in.
Yes. Yes.
And that could be for the good or for the bad. And so, we can talk about all that stuff, man. What I want to say is that Massey is your home, man. Massey's available. And to be honest with you, I told somebody, they said, Dr. Wynn, what happens if you go one day? I go, that's a crazy question because I'm always going to be home here in Richmond, no matter where I am. Look,
Right.
ain't going to get rid of me like that. So if I'm at Massey, that's good. But wherever I am, I'm here.
Love it.
And we're building that network because the network should be more than just local. It really should be a national network.
Has to be. Has to be. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Wynn, this has been an honor, a pleasure, and a joy. Just God bless you sincerely, brother. We appreciate you so much. It's really just amazing. Every time I hear you speak, every time the vibes and just like the joyful, peaceful presence you bring, man, it's a gift to the world. Just want to give you that, man. Thank
Nah,
you.
man. Hey, look, man. Listen. Thank you for the honor of me being able to sit in this space with you, bro, and for what you do.
Thank you.
Come on now.
Thank you, bro. Appreciate that. For sure, for sure. And friends, to hear this episode and others, make sure you subscribe to baddestchaplain.com. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts rather, live streaming on Twitch and YouTube whenever we do these episodes. So until next time, be blessed, take care of yourselves, and much love, y'all. Take care.